start. Brandon's running a little late because he's signing things, and, well, it's Brandon. I think anyone who's been here more than once understands that. So, this is the Religion in Your World panel, where we're going to talk about the use of religion as a storytelling device and plot constructs, etc. We are not going to talk about real religions or their actual applications in the real world. We are here to talk about the use of religion in fantasy, science fiction, etc. So let's go ahead and start off with an introduction of our panelists.
Hello, I'm Stuart Jaffe. I write, I can project.
Okay.
Fine.
I write all kinds of fantasy and science fiction. I have a post-apocalyptic fantasy series, a paranormal mystery series, and my new series, it's a YA dark fantasy, so I'm all over the place.
I'm Delilah S. Dawson. I write the Blood series for Pocket, which is based on a parallel world where about half the people and most of the animals are blood drinkers. There's an entirely different kind of religion based on a really crazy bitch redhead girl. And I also have a young adult coming out with Simon Pulse next year called Servants of the Storm, based on the idea of Lilith giving birth to a bunch of demons with animal aspects, and they take over Savannah and everyone dies.
I'm Alex Bledsoe. I write the Tufa novels, which are set in modern-day Appalachia and involve descendants of fairies living there, and they have their own religion. And then I also write the Eddie Lacrosse fantasy mysteries, which feature several different religions throughout the different books.
I'm Anthony Taylor. I'm the author of Future Was Fab, The Art of Mike Trem, and also Arctic Adventure, which is an official licensed Thunderbirds novel. And I would feel a little weird being on this panel, except for apparently the programming department reads people's minds, because I am, in fact, working on an urban fantasy series right now that is based around biblical aspects, so kind of ties in nicely. That's why people cancel my appearance.
I'm Seanan McGuire, and every year I strive to have those sincere pumpkin patch in California. The great pumpkin will come for me one day.
Okay, then, well, let's go ahead and start off with, well, ladies first guest of honor. Oh! And then some guy shows up and crashes the panel.
Where are we going to put him?
I had to, like, give people size. Wow, this is a big panel.
Yeah.
We're going to kill and eat one of the panelists to demonstrate human sacrifice.
Exactly.
Guess who was late?
How do you look in wicker?
You got the blind spot on fall.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I guess I'll project now.
We have a spare microphone, guys. If you move this down, move yours to Alex. We have an actual spare microphone.
Where there are only two.
Whatever. As we're trying to do math.
Math is hard.
Math is hard.
Physics?
Quantum physics.
Let's do quantum physics.
Do quantum physics. So, you know, there's actually 7 microphones, but it looks like 6 because of wave theory. Well, that's a different panel. So, okay. So anyway, so I said this is the Religion in Your World panels, and you know, all of the authors here have used religion in various spots in their writing. So, yeah, I'd say you. Actually, I'll even go to you. In Newsflesh, religion is actually a bit of a big thing as it plays out in the plot.
That's fair. I don't really think of that as using religion so much. I actually think I handled it less well than I wanted to, because some people took a message I didn't intend, that I was being anti-religious, and I was not. I'm anti-using your religion to justify doing shit you know is wrong, which I think is very different than being actually anti-religious. I did look at a lot of what it would do to religious funeral practices, like Judaic funeral practices. You're not supposed to cremate. Well, if everyone who dies gets up and tries to eat you, how do you deal with that when you do have religions that don't allow for destruction of the physical body? Is God going to give you a dispensation for burning Grandpa if he was going to eat little Marie? Like, how do we handle this?
And are brains kosher?
Brains are not generally kosher. No.
There might be a line in there about against cannibalism.
I mean, I did ask a lot of horrible questions of various rabbis that I know about things, and whether they would be kosher. And sometimes those rabbis were like, Seanan, are you actually writing a book, or are you just asking horrible questions? Like when I asked if I could wallpaper a kitchen in ham. You can, in fact, wallpaper a kitchen in ham, provided it is not drippy ham and it does not contact any cooking surfaces. So, still kosher. Unicorns, probably not kosher. The use of religion in fiction is interesting and a little touchy, if only because people tend to bring their real religion without the outside forces of the fictional universe into it. You know, if you come from a world where drinking blood is kind of icky and the religion is founded on drinking blood, you're going to think this is a gross religion. But if you come from a world where drinking blood is normal, we've got a religion where we're supposedly literally eating the Son of God and that's cool. Ew! God! The first time I actually encountered Catholic practices with the Irish side of my family, they were like, and then it's going to transubstantiate into the flesh of Christ. And I'm like, I'm not allowed to bite people. Like, how are we working with this here? This is not cool. So the hardest thing for me on writing religion is keeping people from taking their real world, no zombies, no fairies, no vampires, years and centuries and millennia of baggage, keep them from bringing that into my fantasy world and being like, your treatment of religion is insensitive. My treatment of religion lost India. They're going to have a couple different rules.
Well, I'm open forum, so if you want to chime in, I'm very open forum. I'm not going to constantly say, and now Brandon for 300.
If there's money to be won, I can talk more.
Do you have a question for us, or is it?
It's open. I'm just saying, how do you feel, you know, openly? How do you feel religion should be used as a tool? Or what uses does it give you?
Well, I'm fascinated by religion. I'm a religious person, and so I find myself coming back and time again to look at how different types of characters would view religious experience, or how magic will influence how people deal with religion. I'm writing mostly high fantasy, and so I get to kind of do whatever I want, and that's fun. That's what I started writing science fiction and fantasy for. Though I've kind of been led by one guiding principle, and this is the Dan Brown principle. I read the Da Vinci Code, which I thought was in places fascinating and in places terribly written. But one thing really bugged me, and that was when the religious character was in the book, to act like an idiot. Right? And I had no problem with the philosophy he was espousing. Like, this is interesting. I'm glad someone's talking about this. What I was bothered by was the idea of a shallow character. And if you read that book, and you know, he didn't do it as bad as some. There are other places. I just mentioned that one because it's one that's stuck in my head. A character who believed like me, but at every corner was there to be, you know, you've seen the straw man arguments. You've probably seen them in things you yourself believe. Whether it's, you know, political beliefs or whatever, you'll read a story and someone's in there to be the knucklehead who has to get proven wrong. And one of my things I just decided was, I never want to be writing the knucklehead, regardless of their religious views, whether those religious views are no religious views, or whether those, you know, I always want to be approaching this from the way of, these are real people, and they really think this, and how can I capture that? Because as a writer, that's what I'm doing, is I'm capturing slices of people's lives, and then letting them talk and argue and fight and discuss as they passionately would to bring about this life to a story. That's where it comes from. And so, you know, that's kind of my rule of thumb. If I'm going to have religion, I'm going to look at it, particularly if it echoes a modern religion, and I'm going to see what people really believe, and I'm going to try and use that in the book in such a way that someone reading that book would say, yes, even though the other characters argue that this is wrong, and they may have good arguments, the person who believes like I do makes the right arguments. They don't make the stupid arguments. And that's just very important to me. And it goes beyond religion to all sorts of philosophies, but that's I think it's important for me on this particular panel.
The thing about religion for characters is it oftentimes provides them a context for their actions, whether it's in reaction to the religion that's around them or in service of it. In one book, I've got, you know, like I said, a race of fairies that live in Appalachia that worship the night winds. They get messages from that. They interpret signs from that. That provides them with the structure for their lives. also in that is a young Methodist minister who is, I intend him to be a heroic figure. He's not taught, he's not treated in any sort of way for being, less enlightened for believing in a very traditional way. But it does the same thing for him. It gives him a context for his interaction with these other characters. And not to make the book sound like it's comparative religion text or anything, but the way these two come together generates a lot of the drama and forces both sides to kind of reevaluate what they're doing. And I think particularly if you're creating a fictional religion, it's very easy to come up, with a scary priest or a priestess or something and elaborate rituals and everything. But the real test of it is what does it make the believers feel? How does it help them interpret their world? And if you can create that level of reality with it, I think you can say you've got something valid that will work in the story.
That actually ties in with what I was going to say, which is that when you are creating your own religion for an alternate world of some sort, you really need to treat it like you would treat any world-building aspect. And the more you create it in your own notebooks as a writer, before you've actually written the book, but when you're just making it up, the more detailed it is, the more you understand it, the more opportunities you're going to have to exploit that for really good storytelling. And even though I assume most of you probably realize that, like, for every little bit of world building that actually makes it in a book, we usually have done a lot more that's underneath that. And so religion it's the same thing. You can tell when we're just BSing our way through it, or if we've actually done the work. So in my post-apocalyptic fantasy, it's a dual deity system, the brother gods, and so there's a whole long history that I have detailed out, and maybe in subsequent books down the road I might mine that to bring stuff out. But if I never get to any of it, I know it's there, and it comes out in the little details that that you may not even know are there, but they're there.
I think also that having working within some sort of religious framework in fiction allows the reader to we were talking about context, Alex, is to have sort of a starting point from which the author might be able to do a comparison, morality or another character's beliefs, and turn something on their head that people are able to kind of take that as a starting point and have it as a foundation, so that even if it's not the religion that you might be familiar with, pretty much all religions have tenets that are the same. So if we talk about creating one or just referencing one, then we all sort of have a similar experience from our childhood or wherever we were first assimilated the religious experience for ourselves.
Comment, question?
Yeah, so I was just going to ask, when you put religion into your world, do you tend to take the religion out of our world and you're putting it in a different context, or you build it from what's in the world that you're creating?
Can I take that? Yeah. My book is steampunk paranormal romance. It started out as an adventure fantasy and had the sex added in later, so there actually is a story and no one sparkles. And, and the rabbits have teeth too, so there's meat there. But I have a chip on my shoulder about religion. This is my hometown. My grandparents are conservative Baptists, and I was asked not to come back to their church because I asked too many questions. So in my book, if you read it, you can probably tell that I was kind of treated badly by Baptists at some point. They are, in my world, there are people that are like us, and they believe in a grand saint who saved them. And then the blood drinkers, which is half the population, they're not dead, they're just blood drinkers. They know that that saint was actually the first blood drinker and that she was a raging redheaded bitch. And she went on a grand killing spree, and they are all totally covering it up. So it may be taking some of the worst parts of religion that bother you and playing with them within a context where your grandparents don't disown you. But I like that when you take religion in a book and you take religions that exist, at least in fantasy, which a lot of us write, you get... Did my grandparents disown you?
No, I'm just laughing. I'm laughing because I've got two polar extremes, and I'm here in the middle, and I'm an atheist, so I'm in the middle here.
Yeah, I mean, but it's possible but to still be spiritual and to still ask the questions that you're not allowed to ask in church because it's fantasy.
How do you feel that playing in the fantasy world, where oftentimes we have magic or actual substantiated deities that come down and mess with people in biblical sense, if you will, not modern day sense, how do you feel that affects the religion in your stories?
One of the problems with religion in stories is that it actually has to make sense. I mean, I'm serious, any religion we've ever had in human history, the rules that are supposedly given to us by the god or gods and the rules that half of us follow half the time are not the same rules. You hand an alien the copy of any holy book you care to and say, these are the rules we live by. And they're going to look at the rules and they're going to look at you and they're going to go, no, really.
A lot of religious texts are rife with contradictions.
They are.
Exactly.
They're right.
But when you're talking about fantasy or fiction, let's say, you got to build that world so that everything kind of like flows together, right?
Right, but also just in writing a holy book.
Yeah.
I was reading the Bible because reasons, and the number of times that Jesus says, be good to the poor, give to the poor, do not begrudge the poor, support the poor, help the poor, expect no reward on earth. There is no point in there where Jesus says, cut off welfare for the poor. Right. But most of my Christian family is not in favor of welfare. And this is baffling because they're the ones that insist they live 100% by the Bible, whereas I live by the tenets of the Great Pumpkin, and the Great Pumpkin just says, share your candy. You know, he's a pretty straightforward God. In fiction, you can't have that. You have to construct a religion, whether it is a religion with an embodied God and magic or just a flat religion, where the rules on paper are the rules your people live by all the time. And so they can't be contradictory, as you're saying. They can't be too strict.
I'll disagree with that.
Okay.
But I think what you're saying is wise, but I think there is also, there's a caveat. It digs into, when you're building your story, how much is the religion going to be a source of conflict for the characters?
True.
And that is what guides me when I decide how much world building to put where. Because you can spend, you could spend 20 years world building, like Tolkien did, and write one grand epic at the end, and that's fine. That's what you want to do. I want to eat during those 20 years. And for me, that means I need to focus my attention. And when you start introducing contradictions, then it becomes a source of conflict. And when it becomes a source of conflict, it becomes a plot point. And then readers are going to expect you to expand upon it. And I have done books where I've made the religion messy, like real religions are, where there are contradictions, where the characters are like, this doesn't make sense, do I really believe this? But then that becomes part of what the story has to be about. And if you don't want to go there, which is perfectly fine, because you can't do everything in every story. You really can't. If you don't want to go there, then you've got to be aware that when you start spending the depth of your time world building and putting it in the story, it's going to create certain expectations for the reader. And I think that's kind of the caveat to what Sean was saying, is that, that just be aware of that. And most of the time you probably want to do what she's saying, because otherwise it becomes what we call a gorilla in the phone booth. Which is, if you're describing your story and characters walking along and says, and by the way, there was a gorilla in the phone booth, guess what is now the most important thing that you deal with in your story? And if you start talking about characters having big conversations about your religion, that's got to then become a plot point, because you're making the readers invest in it.
Can I address the question that you asked, which is about when you have a god or a goddess that walks among men, for lack of a better term. To me, the rule for that is kind of like the shark in Jaws. You don't see the shark for most of Jaws, and therefore the shark is really, really scary. If you read, say, Dracula, Dracula is not in the novel Dracula very much at all. He's in the beginning, and then the heroes spend a lot of the rest of the book just talking about him. That makes him scary. Gods and goddesses are kind of the same way. If they're walking around, if you can go up, and high-five them or whatever, they're not majestic. They're not godly. They become, in essence, other characters with greater powers than some other characters might have.
The superheroes.
Yeah, but they don't have the scale and the majesty that deity should have. So I think, if you're going to put a god or a goddess in a story, as a character, you know, you have to really be aware of what you're creating and what it's going to do to the scale of this character. Now, I'm not saying you can't do that. Obviously, the Greeks managed it fine, and lots of other people have managed it. But
But they weren't scared of Zeus. They were sleeping with him.
Well,
they were also scared of Zeus.
Yeah, one of both.
Because he could appear before you as a giant ant at any time.
Well, all you had to do was kill a goat. Like, it wasn't... you didn't have to tie. It was just
Really, what they were afraid of was Hera. That's really the
I do think, though, if you're going to have a god like more present in your story than you're describing, then you have to play upon other uncertainties. Because really, it's just, that's what it is. It's always the fear of the dark is better than the fear of what you can see. So if you can see the god and the god is, you know, hanging out playing poker with you, then there has to be some other uncertainty about it as to, you know, what's going to happen. There's actually... I really don't mean to reference my book here, but I'm going to. So in this book is about a girl, this is called A Glimpse of Her Soul. It's about a girl who's discovers that there's a secret message etched into her soul, and there's all these weird little monsters that are trying to kill her so they can read her soul as it departs her body. So I have all these creatures, and they're all over the story. And so they lose their impact of being scary because they're all over the story. So this is what I had to deal with on a lesser degree than a god. But of how do you create that uncertainty? And the uncertainty ends up being, especially because one of her allies is one of these creatures, and you're never certain what the motives of these things are. I mean, I tried to make them as inhuman as possible, so you just don't understand their motivations, what they think of as morally right or wrong. I mean, they're their own religion that's just completely unfathomable. And that uncertainty has turned out to really work in my favor, and it makes them very scary because you just never know. You think you know where a scene's going to go, but you've got this, you know, random aspect, at least random to the reader, of what's going to happen. And I think that's what you have to do with, if you're going to choose to have a god around all the time, you know, Zeus might be really hanging around with you, but in the back of your mind as well, is he going to be nice Zeus? Or is he going to be mean Zeus? Because he can be both. He can smite me.
If you want to see a really excellent example of using gods in the text, keeping the religion odd enough to be interesting and keeping things uncertain, look at N.K. Jemisin's 10,000 Kingdoms. 100,000 Kingdoms? 100,000 Kingdoms. They are brilliant, and she did an incredible job both coming up with a religion that hangs together and showing what happens when a human priesthood builds up around that religion. She kept the whole thing really well done for 3 books, and I'm a folklorist, and I still liked it, so.
On the other end of the spectrum, one of my favorite writers is Matthew Woodring Stover. And I love his Acts of Cain. I was rereading it recently. The first book had such major impact. It's one of my all-time top 10 favorite books. Heroes Die. And then in the second one, at some point, I was like, why did I stop getting really excited? They're like, because Malkoff became a person and was talking about how ridiculous his own religion was. And that was the point at which the big baddie became like, he's just a kind of buff dude who makes people slide through a big statue uterus. I don't understand. So I recognize that once that happens, because of those books, like it's like my object lesson of that's when the thing that I loved became the thing that I kind of went, oh, that's a little too close to home as far as seeing the man behind the curtain.
You know, working with embodied gods too, I think it's you know, even the best writers sometimes fall prey to using Deus Ex Machina. And how can you avoid it if the Deus isn't all the way from the scroll? You know?
Yeah. We have a comment to that?
Hi, stand up so I can see you guys. Talking about conflict within religion here. Some of the best stories that I get involved with are ones where the bad guy truly believes what he's doing is the right thing. And if you take a look at modern religion, for example, I think you could make it really abstract and say, on the one hand, you have a religion or a set of religions that think, say, altruism is straight through altruism, that the group is better than the individual. On the other end, it's more like selfishness. Selfishness is, you know, extreme selfishness, and that's kind of like evil in a sense. If you really boil it down to the basics there, each side, if you can argue each side that has its best argument. Right? I'm wondering if you guys have ever used that in a sense, pitting the two sides of religion together to get that conflict, and in the end, it kind of becomes gray or something like that. You're not sure maybe who to root for or something like that. Does that make any sense?
So you got your Jedi and your Sith.
There we go.
Well, yeah, it's sort of like that, but it's more, I guess, more different than that. But each side thinks they're doing the right thing. And you're kind of pitting them together against each other.
If your antagonist doesn't truly believe that he's the protagonist, you have a lot of redrafting to do, whether religion's in there or not. Your bad guy should always think he's the good guy. He should always think he's the hero. And he can know he's doing evil stuff, but he's doing evil stuff for a damn good reason, even if that damn good reason is just, I want a Ferrari.
And you'll notice that most people that are the I want a Ferrari type, if you really get down and talk to them, it's because life has treated them poorly and they deserve a Ferrari. Mm-hmm. It's not I want a Ferrari, it's I should have a Ferrari. Yeah. And this is where you really get into the interesting psychology, and this totally applies to religion. Mm-hmm. We have been wronged, and we should have this, is basically like one of the big rationalizations for a lot of the atrocities committed throughout the history of mankind.
And then, in the name of religion, you just add, God wants me to have it.
And God wants me to have it, yeah.
Yes.
I was going to say that, you know, Sean, I read your books, you did great. I told you earlier about your religious aspects. The rest of you guys, Brandon, your religions make sense. Okay? Like, don't do it. It's like, yeah, so you did great. But what you guys, what both of you have done, that I can tell, also NK Jefferson did a good job of it too, is the effect of religion on society and how things change over time. And like, and one of the main things I've seen when people, when they write religion into their stories, it's kind of either thrown in there, it's something that they sort of do. It's like, oh, hey, look, big ramstorm God thingy that gives us power. And it's like, well, how does it do that? Next chapter, you know? And so my greatest thing is like how do you make sure that the sociological ramifications of religion are in there properly? Because there is nothing more idiotic than having, you know, the whitewashed version of a story. And like Brandon, you know, he's like, you definitely know that, you know, like in, you know, Mormonism, for instance, what happened in Missouri wasn't bad, you know, and then the trekking and all that. So but you can't go, and then we just decided to move to Utah.
Right.
You know, so like if you flip that over into, like you do a great job of flipping that over into your own worlds where it's like, and then this happened, and then we forgot stuff for a while, and then this, you know, rush.
Good world building of any type is integrated world building. And this, I think, is a place that new writers sometimes stray. They hear, you know, us talk about the fact that we do a lot of world building, and not all of us do, by the way. There are some writers who seat of the pants write their entire book and then fill in the world and world building based on how the story goes, and that's perfectly legitimate way to write. But I do a lot of planning. They hear I do a lot of planning. They hear that I have hundreds of thousands of words of world building, and so they spend their time doing that. But what they don't understand is that what I'm looking for is world building in a religion that integrates with the magic, integrates with the themes of the world, that integrates with the conflicts of the characters. These things all need to influence and affect each other. And your question is, how do you do it? And the answer is, well, it's hard. It's really hard. It really is. I think this is probably the hardest aspect of world building when you say, okay, because the other question is where do you come up with religions? Do you base them on things you see in the real world? And the answer is yes and no. A lot of times I'll be like, all right, I want to do a religion based on this weird concept that is not existent in our world, because that's part of what's fun about fantasy. Other times it's, okay, there's this thing that a religion in our world does. It has this powerful effect on the people who believe it. I want to explore that. So then I transpose that. And making that all integrate, it gets hard. Practice. I don't know, maybe the panel has suggestions. I think our job is to extrapolate. That's what we do as writers. That's what world building really is the extrapolation.
I would agree, and especially in terms of religion. All religions spur from an event, from a personality, from some cultural upheaval. And so you have to take that spawning moment and extrapolate forward.
And it has to go organically. If you're forcing it, people will know. It'll ring up true.
Well, we all have some level of religious thought. We all think about what we believe. And your characters should do that too. They're all going to think different things too, just like we all do. And if you can recreate not even what you're thinking, but the way you're thinking about religion and about what you believe in your characters with different, little permutations so they all don't think the same way, you will find that level of reality that you're looking for. And you will find ways to integrate that into your world, like Brandon said, because you will feel the parallels with your own reality, and you will see how it should operate in your fictional world.
An example of where this goes right and wrong, we can draw both from Star Wars, actually, because the original trilogy felt like it handled a very organic religion in an interesting way, which was spiritual, kind of a religion. It was interesting. And then Lucas, who is a student of mythology and folklore, realized, hey, there's these aspects of the hero's journey and religion that aren't in my world. I need to put them in. And so we got a virgin birth. And everyone watching that movie just went, what? Why does a virgin birth have... That doesn't fit with this religion. And that's where he kind of strayed into the, oh, this is the checklist, I need to make sure this is in, rather than the organic. And you can see a direct example of that happening. And I think all of us as writers are occasionally, we do that. We accidentally, we don't make everything integrated enough. But you can see how that just, I ran into a wall when I watched that show. And it's like, why? Yeah.
It's because he's surrounded by yes men.
You have to have people that tell you no.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if you look at...
real quickly,
okay.
Something, because it ties, I also think this happened to Lucas too, is it's going to happen to everybody when you're world building, but with religion particularly, you of course are going to be bringing your own baggage to the story, which is why we write, or one of the reasons. But when you're world building, I don't bring a lot of baggage to setting up the geography of a planet, but when I'm setting up a religion of a planet, there's a lot more going on there, and so you need to be able to really step outside of yourself and make sure that what you're bringing to this made-up religion is going to be integrated, as you said, important for your story, as opposed to, I really hated this when I was growing up, and I'm going to do... Not that you can't be negative or positive, but that you don't want it to come out as a soapbox, I guess is the word I can think of.
You don't want to be preachy about it.
Yeah, or didactic, or any of that. You just, and it's such an. I'm stressing only because it's such a pitfall, so that you can fall into so easily with religion specifically in world building.
In the original '77 Star Wars, when original
second seven,
when
there will be.
Wait. When Luke, when Obi-Wan dies and Luke is suddenly on his own because the hero always has to lose his mentor, he hears Obi-Wan's voice saying basically common sense things like run or use the Force, which is something that, Obi-Wan had told him, so it could very easily be just a memory. But there's an implication in just that movie, because by the second movie, when Obi-Wan shows up to chat, it ruins this. But in that first movie, there's an implication that this is actually the spirit of the Force talking to him, not Obi-Wan. It's using Obi-Wan's voice because he trusts Obi-Wan's voice. But that was, that was colossal in implication. That was religious in its scale. And of course, by The Empire Strikes Back, Obi-Wan's just popping up everywhere, saying hi, and you realize, and you realize then, no, it's Obi-Wan. It really is Obi-Wan talking. And to me, that lost something there. I mean, as good as Empire is, I think it lost something in that aspect.
Well, quick thing, I just want to read. We have a question here. I'm sorry.
Hi. I've got a world, and I originally did not really build any sort of religion in it, and then I realized that peoples, as groups, they have greater or lesser degrees of spirituality, so I'm trying to figure out, after doing many, many hours of world building, just how that would come into play, whether it's like the Wheel of Time world where everybody kind of knows and just about everybody agrees more or less on the spiritual implications of various things. Or I've got two very different cultures. How do they interpret world, the things that happen in their world and with the magic and things like that. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to retrofit it, basically. Have any of you ever had to deal with that?
I would say that how does the culture communicate within itself? Because if your religions only grow if the word gets out and spreads, so that's a good angle to look at, especially from the start that you mentioned there.
Look at how they handle everything else. What's their infant mortality rate? What kills them? Do they enjoy paperwork? I'm serious. The Chinese mythology is amazing. You've got literally the celestial bureaucracy of heaven. We have records of over 7,000 gods. Some of them have been fired. Like, maybe just pink slip a frickin' god. We're very sorry. Your services are no longer required. And now there's a new goddess of smallpox. A lot of cultures actually have a god or goddess of smallpox because smallpox will mess you up.
It's one of those cultural events.
It's one of those big cultural events. There are several religions that believe that there is a god or demigod figure that shows up around the age of 2 to deliver children's souls to them. And before that point, children do not have souls. Infanticide is not a crime. Because if your infant mortality rate is above 50%, that is the only way to keep the mothers in your culture from going crazy. Babies have no souls. Babies are just an inconvenient thing you have to take care of to get to children. You know, look at the founding points of the culture and ask yourself, what would they think is right, what is wrong? What is a natural disaster that maybe we can placate someone to hold off? Smallpox is a natural disaster if you don't have immunization. Do children have souls? If yes, who takes care of them? Who decides how many of them go? Do you have a culture of leaving babies on hillsides to encourage more babies to survive? There are a lot of building blocks for religion. Any religion with a single god is a fairly advanced religion. It's a religion that was brought up by people who had agriculture, who had fabric, who had a way of holding body and soul together long enough to say, you know what? We don't need 80 gods anymore. We just need one. Let's condense our sacrifices. You can have sophisticated multi-god religions that survive past that point, but it's borderline impossible for a culture to come up with a monotheistic base when everyone is going everywhere. Household gods and family gods are much more common. Does everyone have a family god that is genuinely powerful and you and I have to negotiate before we can have dinner? You know, my family's god says don't eat goats because goats are our friends. What does your family's god say about goats? Your family's god is cool with goat eating? I should eat at your place because if you come into my house and you're a goat eater, I gotta kill you.
That's kind of where that's the avatar concept.
Yeah.
From a really practical standpoint, if you've already got the majority of your world building done, I would go to the character that you think is the most upstanding moral person and write down like things that they believe. Is killing okay? Sleeping with your sister okay? Sleeping with your brother's wife okay? Is it okay to kick dogs? And then look at the most evil person that the entire community reviles, that like the gamma dog that everyone looks down on, like what do they believe? And that can kind of tell you the polarizing effects of like, this is the person everyone wants to be and this is why, and religion must have affected them to be that way because most people aren't really altruistic. They have some kind of just inspiration towards it.
I'd also ask yourself, do you really need religion mentioned at all? You've obviously written the whole thing, and as Brandon has said several times already, you don't want to introduce these things and create problems unless you need.
What I was thinking though is that people tend to be, like peoples and group, tend to be more or less spiritual. There's something there. I don't know that there are very many cultures in this world, for example, where there isn't or hasn't been something.
Right, and that is true, that happens, but you are writing fantasy. Decide the story you want to tell. You brought up Robert Jordan. When asked about this, he said, in the Wheel of Time world, because of the way that magic works, and because of the nature of the world, everybody knows that these things are real. They're empirically proven. So there's no need for religion, was the way he put it. If it's empirically proven, people can be spiritual, and there is no religion. Now, he was also kind of working off of the kind of early 1800s sense of no religion, we can do it on our own, and that's the sense, you know, the Two Rivers folk and things like that. So to give that feel to it, but at the end of the day, he did not want that to be a major plot point. And so he didn't put it in, and that's fine, it works. You can do it in fantasy. It's part of why we write this genre. And it's part of like what you mentioned earlier. You can take something from our world, you can take all of the baggage away from it and put it in kind of a safe, quote-unquote, method so you can deal with it and talk about it. So if there are things you want to do with that, you can. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. You just make the story, decide what you want your story to say. Not the message, but the feel.
You still have something to say?
Yeah, no, it was just a quick thing to how that went was just once Lucas started releasing books and the comic books, all that stuff was explained. So I mean, even people who whine about midichlorians, it's explained. It's like, and it's actually a lot more simple than you think it is. It gives them something to target and manipulate. It's not woo-woo. It's, hey, here's a thing. It's like, oh, hey, here's a chair. I can move.
It's quantifiable. And
yeah, and so
the religious aspect is gone.
Yeah.
It went from being religion to basically Asperger's.
it's just. I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like, it's a generational thing about what had happened. And as I got in Star Wars, it's 50,000 years worth of freaking history. It's like, and I could tell you all 50,000 years you wanted to, but it's one of those things where it's like, I hear people saying constantly, oh, midichlorians ruined it, or, you just said, oh, it was mysterious. Well, yeah, mysterious to a degree. It depends on what you consider mysterious. Ghosts pop up. Ghosts of ancient lords pop up. Ghosts of your friends will pop up. They don't last very long, and they can't do it after a certain amount of time.
But you know what? I really don't want to get into a conversation about midichlorians, but I will say this because I think it directly talks about what we're talking about. The reason that pissed off so many people, myself included, was because it broke with the religion of the Force that had been established before then. For those of us who were only watching the movies, and it's kind of like what you were saying with the virgin birth. Suddenly, there's this element that doesn't belong.
It's just something as writers you want to be aware of. I think if you went to Lucas right now, he'd say, I liked the effect that had, and I put it in on purpose. That's fine. But you're writers, you want to do things on purpose and learn what doing certain things, the effect it will have on your readers, and learn to use that rather than just have it happen.
And the question also becomes one of locked canon versus unlocked canon. Lucas, because he made so much money, could unlock his canon. He could put out new editions, he could change the rules and say, no, look, the material supports me. I'm an urban fantasy writer. If I establish a religion in book 1, I can't change the rules of it in book 8. My publisher is not going to put out new editions of books 1 through 7 with completely different rules. I'm also an X-Men fan. The closest thing we have in that universe to a religion is the Phoenix. Well, in the Phoenix's latest appearance, we let the Avengers shoot it with a railgun. Because the Avengers movie made a lot of money, and it's an unlocked canon. So now the Avengers can just shoot God in the face, and we're cool with that, for some reason. If you have an unlockable canon, if you're writing for comic books, if you are George Lucas, if you're George Lucas and in this room, you want to take me out to dinner? If you're writing for an unlockable canon, or a canon that is innately unlocked just by definition, because you haven't actually said, P.S., here's rules 1 through 10, then it's fine to pull something like the midichlorians. I have friends who write in the expanded universe. They've done a very good job of justifying it, but Lucas didn't do that himself. Lucas created a locked canon. Lucas said, here are the rules. And then later he said, ha ha, fooled you, canon's unlocked, everything's going every which way. That doesn't mean don't like them. That doesn't mean they're invalid. They are canonical now. But it's part of the reason you need to think really hard before you change your rules. How much locked canon did you have? How much did people like that locked canon? How do you think the Christians of the world would react if we said right now, P.S., we're reintroducing the doctrine of Mary, and that is actually part of church teachings now. It's an unlocked canon. We'd have religious wars all over the world. This is a smaller, fanish religious war.
And can I add, in the Star Wars universe, like you keep lumping the Jedi and the Sith, I got a bantha skull on the back of my car. I mean, there's Mandalorians. It's not always only Jedi or Sith. Like, fantasy, you can take up your tertiary or your option B or your Zen or your atheist. You don't have to write that kind of religion.
And then there's Gene Roddenberry, who was just like, religion, we outgrew it. Thanks.
But then they find the space stations.
Oh yeah, and the Great Bird of the Galaxy.
The Great Bird, yeah. Okay, so we have one here and then over there.
They could confront it through other cultures.
I had a question, which is, to what extent is it, and I guess this sort of depends on the sort of story you want to tell, but when you're coming up with a story, and we'll say that religion is not necessarily as Brandon said, the source of the conflict or a big element of the story, does the religion come, as you said, the religion could grow organically, but one question is, does the religion sort of impose itself on the world, or do the people make it up? And do you make up a religion in order to serve the characters as they exist, or do you construct the world and then make the characters sort of say what kind of character would evolve in an environment like this, where this religion is true? And then I guess the second question, that kind of the corollary of that is, how do you deal with the characters who see the truth or non-truth of the religion ambiguously? You know, as Brandon said from Wheel of Time, there's no question religion is true. Everybody accepts it. But in many fantasy worlds, it's also always true. The religion is always believed because the gods directly intervene quite frequently. But a lot of times, the religion is not necessarily explicitly true. And it must be believed in an element of faith as opposed to empiricism. How do you deal with that?
Well, faith is mystery. And if you're going to have faith, you can't have an explanation. You know, you can't have proof because proof negates faith. And when you're creating a character who's operating in that world, if you want them to really and truly have faith, you can't answer those questions. Now, I'm speaking for myself on this. I always start with a character. I don't start with a created world. So I'm probably working at it the complete opposite way from some other fantasy writers. And when I'm creating a character, one of the things, you know, obviously you do is, what do they believe and how does that manifest in their actions? And then from that you extrapolate what kind of world would show this to its best dramatic effect. And then you try to polish that so that you have created a world in which you've created the only world in which this story could occur. I'll use an example in the Michael Keaton Batman and the first Christopher Nolan Batman. Tim Burton created a world in which Batman could exist. Christopher Nolan created a Batman that could function in that world. It's two completely opposite ways. I mean, they're both valid. There's nothing wrong with either one of those approaches. But faith is an element in there, and depending on where you're starting with your world, kind of depends on how much of it you can answer. But I firmly believe you can't truly recreate the mystery of faith by answering all those questions.
Can I just say that was a brilliant metaphor?
I'm going to steal that.
Because I don't think any of us have faith in this table. We believe in it. We believe it's here. We may have faith that physics say that the atoms making up this table will not fly apart.
But it will fail us.
Yeah, but we don't have faith in the table. We just believe it's there. And that's kind of the difference when you have incarnate gods. You don't have to have faith in something that can actually throw a lightning bolt at your head. You just have to believe in it very firmly.
Right.
Yes.
So one of the big challenge of world building is to make your world believable. And if you don't have a culture that's believable or whatever magic system, then it can be a big immersion break. So with the religion, I found, like some of the stuff you were saying, a lot of religions don't sound believable, other than the fact that that people actually did believe in those things.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deal with that challenge when designing a religion? That most religions, if you design, will not really sound believable, and you don't have the real world phenomenon of people actually doing it to fall back on.
Well, what Shannon said earlier of err on the side of making it more real or not more real, more, well, how would you say that? More logical? More logical. More logical. Erring on that side is usually actually, for a lot of your world building, a good idea. Just the truth is stranger than fiction thing is something we run into. Yeah. So I would say that's a good rule of thumb.
Another thing though too is if you're, for whatever reason you need it or want it to be odd, is to integrate it into the world in the sense that it's not that you have a town and this is the religion they believe. In most cultures, they're the same. So the religious belief affects the architecture of the town. It affects the way people greet each other. You know, if it's truly believed by the majority of the people, it affects every aspect of their lives. And when you have that happening, then the reader will be able to believe some really outlandish things because they're getting all this evidence that it exists in this world.
I would say also as a writer, like you have this chance to, and maybe it's a little bit more, probably more whimsical than some people's, but you can have somebody be like, Jesus Christ, and they're like, do you actually believe in Jesus? And they're like, no. I mean, your characters can express their own doubts or their own, I go with it because other people do. Like, it's in your power to where you can make your characters discuss the things actual people would.
Yeah, that's, I mean, these are just two basic philosophies of writing. And you probably use both tools. One is they hang a lantern on it, right? That's a screenwriting term. Where you actually say, have someone, an outsider in the world say, you know this is all crazy, right? It just looks crazy. And if someone to have a conversation about it. Or it's the method of, if you just present it as real, you have a certain amount of suspension of disbelief that your readers will give you. And if you can make use of that, they will go a long ways with you. And usually, you know, yeah, I mean, that's what we make our living off of you doing that. So thank you. But yeah,
that's definitely one place in world building where you basically can't just go batshit crazy, and it doesn't matter because it is.
Well, there are different shapes too. Like my grandmother literally believes I'm going to be poked into a fiery pit with a pitchfork and burned for eternity. For whatever reasons.
And that's an illogical
And some
thing
people
to
just,
believe.
and some people, you know, but there are different variations of believing in hell or believing in good or bad, but you can still call yourself a Christian. I mean, there are different shades of every religion.
I believe that a giant orange gourd is going to bring me candy. And then we're all going to hang out in the cornfield for eternity. I've just decided to believe that because it's the best alternative. I'm basically agnostic, and maybe when I die, the great pumpkin will show up with candy. That is the best of all possible futures. And then I'm going to go trick-or-treating in other people's afterlives.
I got a rock.
That way I get to see my friends again.
We have one way in the back.
I'll try to do my best with this one. Right now, I'm actually, for the last 2 years, I've been building a fantasy world, trying to figure out the best way to do it, you know, as per the story. And one of the biggest things I have run into is the problem of religion. Not necessarily the problem of it, but multiple religions in one whole world. One of the biggest plot points is that the protagonist hangs out with a more tribal group, you know, multi-deities, things like that. And they come to learn that the rest of the world isn't quite on their same page because they've been locked away. It all has to do with the magic and everything else going through. So one of the biggest things I'm running into, though, is trying to make these people seem crazy and fanatical without making them crazy and fanatical like the bad guys. I don't want to pick a side in the story and say these guys are right, these guys are wrong. What are some ways I can fact check to make myself neutral across all boards and say everybody has a great idea?
Well, if you're starting out with, I want to make these people look crazed and fanatical, you're already not neutral. Like, you could say, I want one group to seem more right to our general North American accepted model of right, which is essentially monotheism, very little intervention on a daily basis, and don't eat babies. But the other group, you can't say, I'm going to make them crazed and fanatical if your goal is neutrality. You have to excise those words from your vocabulary whenever you're looking at them and just go, why is this the most sensible option? Why did Aeolus bang a giant ant? Why did she think that was a good plan? You know, I love that the laughter from the other room is like, thank you, other room, I appreciate you. You know, why do they have a god of smallpox? Why did they decide culturally that babies, you could kill them until they were 2 and there were no consequences? Those are all things we think of as crazed and fanatical. But you can't take it that way. You will fail at your neutrality goal. You may succeed at your crazed and fanatical goal, but you will fail your neutrality goal, and that sounds more important to you.
Also, just real quickly, remember the fanatical, as she said, puts a layer of bad on it, but there's another word, passionate, which means it's going to have the same effect. So if you think of those characters as being passionate about something, they're going to be approaching it in a better light, and you'll be able to balance that out better, I think.
What non-religious what non-religious influences have you, or if you have, used to create religions? For example, you could look at college football fans and create a religion based on how fanatical they are.
That is a religion. Go Bears!
It's fantasy, anything.
I based a religion around the basic tenets of quarantine. I love it very much. I wish it would catch on in the real world. People would wash their hands more.
I think you're getting into passion there, and that's a real, important thing. And I'll use the example of the Shakers. Are you guys familiar with the Shakers? Okay, from a distance, they look insane. But if you really look into why they behave like they do, it's because they're ecstatic, which is the most positive thing that can be. They're not insane. They just look a little crazy from this perspective. From their perspective, they're expressing a passion in the only way they can. And I think whatever who's going to say NASCAR is not a religion? They have a sacred circle even. But it's the passion that makes people say, "Oh, that NASCAR could be a religion." It's not the accoutrements, it's not the gear or anything or the cars. It's the passion that people bring to it.
Then you have things like spiritualism from the late 19th century, which is based around communicating with dead souls, but was not really had anything to do with Christianity or any other establishment. It was a belief system based on a paranormal thing, so that kind of ties in too. But the paranormal at least has something to do with the mysterious, whereas I don't think a lot of people find college football mysterious.
We have time for about one more question. So, yes.
With a controversial topic like religion, I guess people are quick to sort of try to attribute the opinions of your characters to the opinions of the writer. And I was wondering whether, given the fact that you all have different religious beliefs, whether you intentionally keep those in mind when you make choices for your characters because of the potential sort of overlap, I guess, or just the fact that they may read into something that Brandon writes differently than they read into Stuart because you have different religious beliefs in real life.
Fantastic question.
Yeah.
Can I answer it? I don't know. But it's a fantastic question.
So, I have a really good friend in fandom who is not in a very Christian area of fandom, and she is phenomenally serious about her faith. And I found her crying in the hallway one day because she had gone to a Falk circle, which is kind of folk music for science fiction and fantasy, for those of you who don't know Falk. She'd gone to a Falk circle that had somehow gotten onto the theme of songs about how horrible Christianity is, and how Christianity, destroys pagans, and it's terrible, and it keeps us down. And she tried to sing a hymn she had written about a book that she loved that was a fantasy novel with strong Christian themes, and got told to stop oppressing the room and driven out of it, and just wound up crying in the hall. I do not share her beliefs. Whenever I am coming up with a religion of any kind, or writing about a religion of any kind, I remember my friend Maureen sitting in the hall and crying. And whatever I write about your religion cannot cause that response. Period. And that is the one thing I have to cling to. Screw my religion. My religion does not matter. That character's religion matters, and everyone who shares that religion matter, because I am never going to be the reason you're crying in a hallway.
I think that was very well said.
It was very well and passionately said, yes. Well then, we're out of time, so thank you everyone. Thank you for being very mature and having a very adult conversation about this touchy subject.